This is Pastor Tim coming to you from Central Texas from being in Lomita United Methodist Churches. We're glad to have you join us for our Bible study. We've been meandering a little bit about Methodism and about camp meeting recently, but we're going to get back to Bible study. We're going to do a more detailed flow through or trip through Genesis. First of all, you need to know that the background. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy are all the first 5 books, or the Torah, for the Jewish faith. And for many of the Jewish people, that is the scripture. That is the Old Testament. Others accept the prophets and the wisdom literature to make up what is really called the Old Testament. It's only called Old Testament because it began a long time ago with the covenant with God. And so the testimony to God from the beginning. So we're going to start with Genesis. Tradition is that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. In reality, I think that would have been really hard for them to do, because Moses was a prince of Egypt, and then he was a sheep herder. And then when he was some 80 years old, God called him to go back to Egypt, where he had begun, and to free the slaves there, to get Pharaoh to let them go. That's the old story of Genesis. But he was marching around the wilderness for 40 years. There was not a whole lot of space for sheepskins on which to write things down. And I don't think when he's leading hundreds of thousands of people that he had much time to write. There was just too much to do, too much administration, too much conflict between people, too many things to worry about, like where you can find enough grass for the animals, enough food and water for the people, and where you were going next. It would have been very difficult for him to write. They didn't have paper like a notebook that he could walk around and write notes in. So I think it was maybe he started the oral tradition that ended up in the first 5 books of the Bible. So we can talk about the oral tradition that came from Moses that led up to these first 5 books. And Genesis is the first book of the Bible. Genesis means in the beginning. All they did was take the first word of the scripture and say, okay, that's the name of it. It wasn't very creative, but it was very descriptive. In the beginning. How did things start? I'm sure that what happened was that some child was sitting around a campfire with his dad, asking him, where did we come from? How did all this come into existence? And what the dad says, well, let me tell you a story. And that's the story of Genesis. It's not meant to be a science book. It's not meant to be a history book. It's meant to be a theological book, which meant it tells you who wrote it more than how or when or where. So it's a book of faith. It talks about what we believe about the nature of the universe. So as we get into it, think of it as the way of describing how God interacts with people and how God interacts with creation. Remember, there are contrary narratives that were during that time, during the time of the writing which was probably during the Babylonian captivity. There were opposing views about hostile gods and very different ways of relating to their gods. The ones they had to plead with and bargain with and offer sacrifices. But God was not that. God ended up being a powerful, the God who created all the universe, but also a loving and caring and forgiving God. And so that's a new beginning for the time when most gods were uncaring and in fact hostile. And most of the time when they came down on the earth, It was to create mischief. It's to cause trouble. So we didn't have a God like that. So let's begin with Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was formless, a formless void. Darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God, that is the breath of God, swept over the face of the water. So in the beginning, it was like a massive gas cloud, which does not contradict what science has said about it. That may have been the way that it began. It doesn't matter if it's a Big Bang Theory. It doesn't matter if it's a space gas that congeals. It wasn't an accident. God's Spirit moved across the face of the water. God moved across the nothingness and began to create life, create the essence of life. It says, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. The heat of the universe congealed into what would be the light sources, the energy sources for the universe. And God saw that the light was good. And from the very beginning, God, all the way through here, is going to say that life is good. The light was good. Darkness is good for the time of rest, but light generates life. And so he declared life from the very beginning to be at its very source good. And God separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day and the darkness night. He called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. There was no light, so how do you tell how long a day is? We think of it as 24 hours, but there were no days in that time. And so God can make a day as long as he wanted it to be. It could be a billion years to take that process into effect. God's not in a hurry. So we can take that to be not a contradiction, but a kind of a parallel agreement with the scientists. And God said, let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the water from the waters. What he meant was that they thought there was a 3-story universe, that there underneath the ground was where the dead lived, that on the surface of the earth is where we lived, and there was a dome over us that contained more water. That's how they explained clouds, and that's how they explained rain, that it came from up above. So to separate the waters from the waters is to say that there was water on earth, and there's also water in the heavens. It just meant that God had created a way to cool the earth and to nourish the soil and the plants and to keep us alive. So God made the dome separate the waters that were under the dome and the waters that were above the dome, and it was so. God called the dome sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. That doesn't contradict science either. Moisture began to form, and that's the essence of life, is to have moisture. That's why we go and look at other planets to see if there's a source of water, because that means that the possibility of life is sustained life. So God created a system by which water would be on the earth and above the earth, that clouds would form and from the evaporating water, and they'd water the soil. And so now that circuit, God created that. God said, let the waters under the sky be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. So the earth it had a gaseous start. It formed, it congealed, and it had moisture on it, and it was maybe a sea of magnum, sea of molten lava that had to congeal, had to solidify, and so that land began to appear. The first thing is land. The first thing is not life. The first thing is land and sea. And so God's creating things that we can see parallels to scientists. Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit, and the seed in it." And so it was. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit, the seed with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was morning, and there was evening, and there was morning of the third day. So plants began to appear. Life comes out of the earth. Seeds began to be shaped, and so vegetation could scatter. So first we have to create an environment in which animals and humans can live. And so that's the first thing that, first signs of life on the earth. God said, "Let there be light in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be light in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. So creation starts with God organizing things so that there's a system of day and night that can sustain the plant life and can sustain human life and animal life. That it was necessary to create the platform by which the life would continue to exist. I think we've been going for quite a while for that first part of Genesis, so I think we'll continue with creation in the next podcast. So I'll see you next time with humans coming on the scene.